afternoon. My name is Jessica Dumas. I'm the chairperson for the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon. I'd like to recognize Treaty 1 territory where we are recording this webinar, home of the Ojibwe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene nations, and homeland to the Red River Métis. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. I really would like to express my appreciation for the excellent communication partnership between the Chamber Network, specifically since the onset of this pandemic. Today's partnership is another example of how we can come together and support one another in times of great need. The Chamber has not stopped working to support our members all across our province. As the province and the rest of the world started to slow down, the Chamber continued to pick up speed in an effort to provide reliable, credible, and valuable advice and feedback to the province of Manitoba, in particular Premier Brian Pallister and members of his cabinet. Today, we're honored to have the opportunity to engage Premier Pallister, members of the Cabinet, and Dr. Roussin to discuss your needs, challenges, and opportunities for the road to recovery. In particular, this event is being held to get your feedback on the province's draft Phase 2 reopening plan, which was released last week. While caution and awareness of prevention is still high priority, having discussions like today's will help Manitoba remain on the road to recovery, physically and economically. Here's what to expect for our agenda. In a moment, I'm going to introduce Premier Pallister and our panelists, and we'll receive welcoming remarks from the Premier, and after that from Dr. Roussin. We'll then move into the question and answer portion following remarks, co-moderated by Loren Remillard and Chuck Davidson. Questions have been solicited in advance, but if you have questions, we'll ask you to please use the Q&A chat stream and we'll get to as many as we can. All members of the panel are available to answer your questions, and the first half of the forum, though, will be focusing on questions for the Premier, if possible, and Dr. Roussin. And now I would like to welcome and introduce Brian Pallister, our Premier. Premier Pallister and his government's efforts continue to see Manitoba being among Canada's leaders in flattening the curve and reigniting our economy. I am pleased to welcome him and thank him for his participation today and ongoing leadership throughout this crisis. And I'd also like to welcome and thank them for their presence, Deputy Premier and Minister of Families Heather Stefanson, Finance Minister Scott Fielding, Economic Development and Training Minister Ralph Eichler, Health Seniors and Active Living Minister Cameron Friesen, and Chief Provincial Public Health Officer Dr. Brent Roussin. So welcome to each of you, and I would like to now hand it over to Premier Pallister for his opening remarks.
Thanks, Jessica, and thank you not just for today, but thank you for taking on the responsibilities you've been willing to assume within the Chamber movement. This is really critical. As a former Chamber president myself, I've always been an advocate for Chamber membership and involvement, and our government has tried in every way we can to demonstrate our faith and belief in the partnerships that I think are critical moving forward. They always are critical, but they've been especially evidenced as critical during this pandemic. So I wanted to say thanks to you, Jessica, and through you, to your board, to the boards of all the chambers across the province, and also to your staff and leadership in your organizations. Your input has been vital to us as we did announce our restrictions, and as we moved into that period of having to name certain essential and vital services. We really benefited from the valuable input that the Chamber and other individuals and groups had given us. And on an ongoing basis, I think that partnership has put Manitoba at the forefront, frankly, of most jurisdictions across the country, because we have been able to demonstrate not only foresight in getting in front of COVID, but also support for one another in a structure that makes sure that we're responsive to the needs, not just of small and medium enterprises in the province, but to our most vulnerable people. As you know, with this pandemic, there's no rule book, there's no playbook. The experts, I learned a long time ago from a friend of mine in the Chamber movement, the experts are always people who don't do the work. They're on the sidelines and they comment. But the real people doing the work know that the challenges are enormous, that they are ongoing, they take courage, they take the teamwork that I referenced earlier. So I wanted to say a special thank you to all those who volunteered to be on chamber boards around the province, all of those who are supporting the chamber movement in various ways, because it's vital as we move forward that we have those partnerships and that we strengthen them, because it is SMEs that are the backbone of our province's economy. And we've tried to demonstrate our understanding of that in the ways we've addressed this unprecedented series of challenges. It seems almost like years that we've been dealing with this pandemic. And I think it's worth going back a little bit and recapping a couple of things. First of all, I'll apologize in advance because I am going to ask for your indulgence. I have a call in 21 minutes with Premier Legault on an issue I hope you support. I know that Chuck Davidson has come out on behalf of the Manitoba Chamber in support of this initiative, but Premier Horgan and I, Premier Horgan, British Columbia Premier, have been pushing the idea of extending paid sick leave beyond the public sector frontline emergency health workers, which most provinces have done, as we did some weeks ago, to private sector frontline workers as well. And so I'm calling the other premiers, and I'm in the process of returning or engaging in those exchanges today and tomorrow. We believe on this program specifically, we believe that it's critical to not discourage people who have symptoms from taking some time off work. And we know that the private sector's got enough of a burden without having to take the load on. So we believe that the governments of Canada have an obligation here to step up and create a national program, because none of us wants a COVID comeback. What we want is an economic recovery. And Manitoba plans on leading the way on that front, and our people have been doing a tremendous job, I think you'd agree, across the length and breadth of the province. And listening to Dr. Roussin, I thank Dr. Roussin for his constant, calm, thoughtful advice, and the way he has guided us through this situation is just exemplary. And I think that what we need to do is stick to the fundamentals and keep doing the social distancing, hand washing, and all of these things, of course, on an individual basis. But we also need our businesses to reopen. And for them to reopen, the staff have to be confident, the customer has to be confident, and for that confidence to get through to the general public more quickly is really essential. And to do that, we have to keep our COVID counts down. We have to make sure as we proceed that there are not people coming to work with symptoms. Coming to work sick jeopardizes the success of our recovery at the small business level, at the government level too. And frankly, we're very, very strong on this. So I hope that you'll consider in the chamber more broadly offering your support and encouragement to us as we lobby and do the things we need to do at the government level to get the federal government to partner up on this program. We think it's worthwhile. I wanted to also, if I could, say thank you to the chambers and other business groups who are involved in trade groups in helping our MLAs. I have with me today our leadership team from government, but we have MLAs as well who are very active and continue to be active in developing protocols. These protocols for how we run our businesses safely are really vital. And that has been an incredible amount of work, both on the elected level, but also from your organizations and your members assisting us to move those protocols forward. So we're following those religiously because that's how we keep people and customers safe. We're investing in additional testing, as you know, and we've stepped up our testing now to include, as the doctor has ordered, those who are not necessarily exhibiting symptoms at this point in time, to broaden the range of our testing. We have the second best record, I think we could argue, in the country in terms of keeping COVID out of Manitoba. Doctor, you might agree? And thank you for agreeing. And we have a great pride in that, but we must remember that COVID is a nefarious and sneaky adversary, and that if we relax, if we stop practicing the fundamentals, we're going to pay the price. None of us on this call want to see that happen. So we're testing, and we're testing more and more. But what we're after here is also increased partnerships on tracking. And I'll just explain quickly why. As you know, under our government, we've reduced red tape. We've reduced the barriers to trade, which has really helped our economy to spring back into action and attract a lot of capital. We need to remember that thicker borders hurt Manitoba more than any other province. We don't need thicker borders between us and our neighbors. What does that mean? We need to encourage more interprovincial business, more international business. To do that, we have to have better tracking. Tracking is expensive and extensive, and it's required here. And so we need the federal government to work with the provinces, and the Prime Minister's indicated a willingness, and I will keep pushing that dialogue because testing and tracking are really critical as we move forward to know where we're at and to be able, as our borders thin as they must, to be able to track cases where business travelers go to other jurisdictions effectively and quickly is vital to keeping those borders less obstructionist to our ability to do more business. I want to say thank you too. We've had volunteers, Bear Clan's one of them. There have been community volunteers assisting in making sure that we have enforcement. I don't like to admit it, but not all Manitobans have followed the directives of Dr. Roussin, and that is sad. So enforcement, we've stepped up in our government level. We have over 3,000 people now trained and equipped, sadly, to offer fines if they have to, and certainly to offer education on an ongoing basis. But I wanted to say thank you. These are important measures to keep the fundamentals that got us the progress we have to date going. In terms of capacity, I spoke about confidence earlier. COVID has come back in virtually every jurisdiction in some form to some degree. We'd like to lessen the degree, but we should be realistic and expect that with much more testing and much more interaction, certainly through the spring and summer months, there may be more cases. But the doctor can explain in more detailed scientific terms why case numbers aren't the best indicator of progress in maintaining safety in a jurisdiction. And it's important for us to make sure that we have realistic expectations and goals as we move forward. That being said, you should know that should a disaster hit, that should there be an increased prevalence of COVID in our province, we have built capacity. Capacity for personal protective equipment has grown to the point where we're not as secure as I'd like, but we're much more secure than most other jurisdictions at this point. Our capacity to house people who are not of urgent but have medical treatment needed, where they don't have to be in close proximity to a COVID patient who is undergoing treatment, is now enhanced. Our medical preparedness is there. We've had the support of our frontline workers. Obviously, that is something we'll never, ever take for granted. But there are many, many others off the front lines who've really done a tremendous job in the public sector too that I want to thank on this call. And I would say in terms of our programming, when we had our first meetings and got advice from the chambers, Winnipeg and Manitoba Chamber, also another Canadian Federation of Independent Business and others, the Business Council, were all involved in giving us valuable input. We designed our programs initially to focus on our most vulnerable people. We announced again today another measure Heather designed and led. Her department should be thanked for that. That will give a small amount of money to those who are living with a disability and to give them the support that they will need through this important time. But our other programs are designed along the same lines. I wanted to say our GAP program, designed to complement the federal government's program and not compete with it, is an important way in which we offer supports. And we've got now over 3,800 Manitoba businesses, with that number accelerating with every passing day, signed up and approved for our GAP program funding, which is the second most generous in Canada. I'm sure somebody on this call is going to remind me we're not as generous as Saskatchewan yet. But the fact is, it is a very useful support program for businesses that don't satisfy the federal criteria. And I want to say also that with our call center, we've been able to save hundreds of thousands of hours for Manitoba businesses who've inquired about program information they want to get. We've been able to get that information out, and I thank again the Chamber for assisting us in that design of that program. I also want to say on the employment issue, we know that the federal programs were necessary. The CERB program to assist many in the private sector were laid off, and I don't want these comments to be taken by you as critical of the federal government. That's not why I'm raising this. But the reality of the CERB program that's coming to us from many small business enterprises is it's making it harder for some of them to get their people back to work. we want to assist in the interim period while that reality exists. And so our summer student employment program was designed in part with that goal. You can get 50% up to $5,000 per employee as a subsidy for up to 5 employees. So $25,000 right now is available to you to employ 5 under 30-year-old summer employees. This is important. I wouldn't be your premier if I hadn't got some education, and some would argue I haven't had enough, but I frankly enjoyed the benefits of the support of small business people as a young man who employed me through the summer months. Without that partnership of a job and a salary, I couldn't have got through university. There's no way. And so right now we have a need that small businesses can really address. And I think there's a double need, back to you, because for some of you and many of the chamber members, they've already communicated to us, they need some help. They need some people to come back and work. This summer employment program will give you $25,000 for 5, up to 5. Of course, if you don't need 5, but you'd like 1, get in line, because we're ready to get that money out to you. At the end of the year, just simply prove that you paid the person, and up to $5,000 per employee will be available to you. These kinds of programs are there to assist in getting us recovered. I've emphasized the importance of sticking to the fundamentals through this process. I'll say again, this is a government that believes in small business enterprise. We've shown it in many ways. We've lowered taxes where others were raising them, cut red tape when others were increasing it, reduced trade barriers where others said no to those kinds of important measures. And we'll continue to stand with you in supporting you being the engine of growth for our economy. Right now, I want to also conclude by saying that our goal, clearly everyone in this call wants Manitoba to be first in recovery, first in resilience. And we are positioned, according to the Royal Bank, Standard & Poor's, a bond rating institution, have both said that they believe Manitoba can be that province that leads in recovery. But I'm a farm boy. And so I tell you, lots of people can predict right now there'll be a bumper crop, but I don't really care about their predictions. What I care about is how much is in the bin at the end of the year. And so I say to you, the results we get will be the results we earn. And so far we're leading the way because we're partnering, we're listening to one another, doing the right things. And we've got to continue to do what we've been doing if we want to lead in this recovery. We're resilient people, and we're team people too. So I'll finish by just saying thank you so much to everybody on this call for being the team people that you are, that are helping Manitoba to be confident going forward that we can lead this country in the recovery from this historic pandemic. Thank you again.
Thank you, Premier Pallister. We definitely appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today, and thank you to your cabinet, to your government for keeping Manitoba's best interest a priority and doing what you can to keep Manitoba and Manitobans safe. I'd like to welcome Dr. Brent Roussin, Chief Public Health Officer for Manitoba. Thank you for all of your work, and I invite you to share your opening remarks.
All right. Hi, well, thanks so much for having me here today. And so I want to thank all Manitobans for taking the steps to help flatten our curve to decrease the impact of COVID-19 on our province to date. These last few months have been challenging on Manitobans, Canadians, and the world. But Manitobans really stepped up to flatten our curve, and the business community is a big part of that. Business communities played a huge role and is going to continue to play a huge role in our success moving forward. So, a lot of already businesses have put in place these physical distancing protocols to decrease transmission. You may have heard of many businesses with large amount of employees are cohorting their employees. And we have a specific example of that in an outbreak you may have been aware of, where a business had already been cohorting their employees and dramatically decreased the size of that outbreak we feel. There was no transmission of that virus outside of the cohort. So it really played a huge role on Manitoba's curve, taking those steps. And so we introduced these very strict public health measures 2 months ago. As we implemented them, we knew we can't keep these in place forever. We need to get used to seeing this virus, to deal with this virus, but we have to gradually reopen our economy and learn to live with this virus. And like the Premier said, we're going to see this virus. We've got lots of zeros on the board, which is great, but we need to get used to seeing this virus. But we have other measures to ensure we're not going in the wrong direction, and we can pick up on the transmission quite quickly. So a lot of those factors that we look at are our case numbers that we can't link to a known case or to travel. One of the biggest measures is the positive test rate of our tests. So as you increase testing, as you look more for something, you tend to find it more. So we're not going to get worried about that. We need to be able to get used to seeing the virus. But if we see the percentage of our tests coming back at an increased rate, that's going to raise some flags for us that we'll have to look further into. And then certainly we look at our capacity in the healthcare system. We're looking at the number of respiratory visits to ERs. We look at bed capacity, ICU capacity, our contact tracing capacity. So all of these are in the green because Manitobans have really stepped up to the plate for us. So it's really put us in a great position. Our healthcare system is in a great position to start gradually rolling things out. And the first phase is, nothing but success. We've now seen 2 incubation periods in that first phase. We continue to be in the green, so we're set right now to start moving into this phase 2, and we're in a really good position. So again, it comes back to those basic requirements, knowing how this virus is spread. It's spread through those large droplets. That tend not to get into the air. They're going to be around 2 meters. That's where we get that 6 feet from. So frequent hand washing, physical distancing are vital moving forward. We know that this virus is predominantly transmitted by people who show symptoms of the virus. And so, like we said, in our new normal, no one's pushing and fighting through that cold coming to work. We just can't have that anymore. We've all done it. I'm sure I've done that many times in the past, but in our new normal, we can't fight through a cold. We have to stay home when we're symptomatic. That's going to be vital to our success going on. And businesses play a role in that too. Every time we put a barrier on somebody making a decision to stay home, it's less likely that they will in fact stay home. And we've seen an example of that again in our most recent cases. And again, it's not to blame because we've all done it, but we need to get used to this new normal where that just doesn't happen. And our business partners can play a big role in screening employees and ensuring that it doesn't happen. So we've had our phase 2 plan put forward. It's a broad reopening, but with restrictions. So we think it's quite a safe plan to get things rolling, to start restoring that confidence in Manitobans, to start getting out, start seeing our economy move. But at the same time, no, it's not a return to normal. That we're still focusing on that physical distancing, staying home when we're ill, hand hygiene, but it's a real safe plan that we have going forward. And yeah, and I think it's, when we get there, we get a lot of specific questions from various businesses. We're always happy to review it and answer, but it'll always come back to those basics of this virus transmission. That is transmitted through close, prolonged contact, especially indoors. It's transmitted by people who are having symptoms. It's transmitted by touching a surface that has a virus and then touching your face. So the hand hygiene, staying home when you're sick, the physical distancing it has set us up for success. It's going to continue as we roll things out if we just really focus on that. So really appreciate being here today. I appreciate all your work, and thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roussin. Again, for those, my name is Loren Remillard, President and CEO of the Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce. A special thank you, of course, Dr. Roussin, for your remarks, Deputy Premier Stefanson, your colleagues from cabinets, and everyone that's joining us on this call today. I think what we've seen is a great reflection of what we're going through with COVID, best laid plans, and then things happen and transpire. And, we know the Premier now has a call, so wish him well in that regard. But we definitely have, many questions we want to get through. We did solicit attendees prior to today's event, and they responded in kind significantly, dozens and dozens of questions. We're not going to be able to get them all, but I want to assure everyone that has submitted questions or are submitting questions on the Q&A portion, all those questions will be forwarded to the province. So whether you get an answer or not, know that your question as an input mechanism itself will be forwarded on to the province and will help continue to shape and advise the government as it moves forward with phase 2 and multiple phases going forward. So again, thank you very much. Chuck and I are going to take turns firing off questions. So I have the pleasure of going first, and my question is to Dr. Roussin. I'd also like to note, the other ministers are in the room, I believe, but just not visually able to be seen. So we do, of course, Minister Eichler, Minister Fielding, I believe, are on the ends there. So we'll get to some questions for you, gentlemen. But Dr. Roussin, a number of the participants had sent us questions concerning the 14-day isolation period in place for people arriving from out of province. They've cited the impact on trade, tourism, and of course the film industry. We've also had questions about whether it would be possible to have people arriving from out of province be tested on arrival, which could potentially reduce the need for a full 14-day isolation period. I'm wondering if you could speak to that idea of testing upon arrival rather than isolation.
Yeah, so a couple good questions there. So one is if you look at the curve of Canada, Manitoba has been able to do quite well. Our numbers are quite low. Still today, almost 1,000 cases reported in Canada. So that puts Manitobans at risk. And so our biggest risk right now is the importation of the virus. So the idea of that self-isolation period is that that's the incubation period of the virus, that the day that you get exposed to the virus, it could take up to 14 days before you develop symptoms. And so if you're self-isolating that whole time and you develop symptoms, you're not going to have any contacts. You're going to get ill, we'll take care of you, you're not going to have contacts. A negative test anywhere in that 14-day period doesn't rule out that you're incubating the virus. So we could have a negative test at day 5, you could still develop COVID at day 10. So a negative test on a person who's asymptomatic doesn't eliminate the need for the 14-day self-isolation period. But what we have been doing, or people who need to leave the province quite frequently due to occupation, we're looking at them as a group that we are doing that asymptomatic testing to maybe pick up on cases earlier. But either way, it doesn't negate the need for a self-isolation period.
Dr. Roussin, Chuck Davidson, I'm the president and CEO of the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce. I want to thank you for taking the time and thank all the ministers for being involved with this as well. One of the big questions I continually get from my members, that we represent close to 71 chambers in the province, is specific in regards to the amount of people moving around the province now and what that's going to look like in terms of opening up borders both to the east, west, and even within Manitoba to the north part of the province. What sort of metrics or what sort of signals do you look for to be able to say, okay, now we think it's safe to do that? I wonder if you can just shed some light on the thinking around this.
That's right. So certainly within the province, the metrics that we're looking at are some of those ones that I mentioned, the percentage of positive tests that we get back. That's a very clear indicator and a very clear trend of community transmission if we start seeing that increase. We look at the number of cases that we see that we can't link to travel or to a known case. That's again telling us that that virus is transmitting in the community where we don't know the transmission chain, and another demands on the healthcare services. So that's what those are those measures that we look at. We get a daily dashboard on those and following those very closely. And so for the interprovincial travel, we look at sort of those indicators, but in other parts of the country. Compare our rates to theirs, and we see certainly our neighbors out to the east are still dealing with this virus, and so we need to make sure we're not importing that virus here. In the travel to the north, we're likely to see some relaxation in those coming forward in phase 2, where we can have certainly more travel to certain businesses up in the north, and that's due to the fact that we're not seeing much of this virus being transmitted in Manitoba. So those are the type of things we look at, and we'll keep a real close look on those metrics.
Thank you, Dr. Roussin. My question is actually to both Ministers Fielding and Ministers Eichler. Of course, there's been several changes to the federal funding sources since the Manitoba GAP program was announced. And we know that the gaps that were meant to be addressed by the GAP program are shrinking. Will the province consider redirecting some of the $120 million earmarked for the GAP program to other business relief initiatives, in particular, many small and mid-sized companies that would never anticipate having to procure personal protective equipment, hand sanitizers, signage, and all the various social distancing support resources. There's a lot of costs that many are having to bear, and responsibly so, and without wanting to do so to support the effort. But again, it is an additional cost to business. So again, is Manitoba now, with the gap shrinking, open to amending the current GAP program, including to pay for things such as personal protective equipment and resources in support of reopening?
Well, thanks, Loren, for the question. Thanks for turning the camera towards me. I hear I'm more of a, an audio conference as opposed to a video conference face. But anyways, just to answer that, yeah, the GAP program, as the Premier had mentioned, there's almost 4,000 businesses. In fact, I think just over have applied for it, really all throughout the province. So a lot in Winnipeg, numbers in Brandon, really all throughout the province. And so the answer to that is, yes, I think we would look at expanding the rules to it. We put a big number there. We're very proud of the fact that we took a little bit of time to make sure the program is right. There's a whole bunch of federal programs that came out. Some have been good, some have utilized more than others. We took some time to make sure we're filling in the gaps. So as we evolve, when we hear from members like yourselves in the business community, for sure we look at. We've already heard from nonprofits and that sorts of stuff. These may be areas that you could take a look at, but we made no decisions on that right now. We want to see how the path and make sure the businesses that we initially put on are there. But absolutely, we would always consider making the plan a little bit better. Did you want anything to that, Rolf?
Basically, the Premier's always said everything's on the table. So it's really important that we understand the needs that are out there from business. You're very good at articulating those needs. Also, it comes back to being responsive in a time that's real, being nimble enough to make those changes. So we're always looking at ways to modify and bring us around to where we need to be.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Roussin, I'll follow up with another question with you, and I think this is something that obviously there's survey numbers that have been out today that indicate in regards to the speed of opening in a lot of provinces is it's kind of split down the middle, and there's big fears obviously, and I think you've addressed this earlier just in regards to what that second wave and in terms of some of the challenges for business. And I know in talking to businesses from throughout the province that the majority of businesses are following your rules to a T in making sure that they're taking all those necessary precautions to make sure that both their employees are safe, that they're taking the necessary precautions to make sure that the public is safe, and that we can continue to sort of build that consumer confidence. So I guess the question, from a business standpoint, when you talk about that second wave, are there certain things from a public health perspective that you think businesses need to take into consideration? Because I can tell you the last thing that they want to have to do is to have to be able to shut their doors like they had to do 10 weeks ago.
Yeah, right. And so, I think that it comes down to the fact that we have to expect to be able to be dealing with this virus for the foreseeable future. And so most pandemic type events like this have had more than one wave. So we're certainly preparing for that. We don't know that. SARS-1 went away, but we don't know what SARS-2 will do yet, but we have to prepare for that. But, the scientific community, public health, and Manitobans, we've learned a lot so far, right? So we had to take aggressive actions at the beginning because we didn't know a lot about this virus. We knew it could be severe outcomes if we didn't, but now we know how to protect ourselves from this. And so I think we're really safe to be doing this because we have measures in place now to protect ourselves. So if we see this virus again, if we see this virus co-circulating with influenza in the fall, which we very well might see, they're all transmitted in the same way. We just can't have people showing up to stores coughing, can't have employees coughing, hand washing, physical distancing. So we've learned a lot, and I think we can still apply that even when we see that second wave, because we just need to be able to live with this virus. We can't keep things shut down forever.
Thank you, Dr. Roussin. My question is to both yourself and Minister Friesen. As many, I'm sure, either as fitness users, fitness facility users, I know my youngest is going nuts working out in the basement when he wants to be at his gym. But we do have a question from a number of our members in the fitness sector. The question is, do you think it's realistically possible for the capacity restrictions on fitness be loosened significantly by the fall or even sometime in 2020? Even though outdoor social gatherings can be up to 50 people, we have been told that outdoor fitness classes, even with social distancing measures in place, are still limited to 10 people. So the first question, and then secondly, can you explain the why as to the discrepancy on the numbers for outdoor?
Well, I'll take a crack at this, and then Brent may want to make a few comments. Thanks, and good afternoon, everyone. You know, all of this is a balancing act, and you've heard us say there really is no rule book to how to reopen an economy after a global pandemic. So this is about trying to get that balance right between keeping people safe, but then clearly trying to restore services, because as Brent says, we have to learn to live with COVID-19. So fitness centers have been a challenge, of course. I'm learning a lot from Dr. Roussin. Such terms as aerosol generating were never in my vocabulary before, but now I'm becoming pretty familiar with that. But we know that, like, if you sing or whether you work out, when you're shouting at a Bomber game, those are the times at which you can really transmit this virus. So I think that in terms of phase 2, to even have fitness centers in here, I really think it demonstrates the extent to which we're trying to get this right. We're trying to say, with protections, with safety, with social distancing, what could this look like? I think it's a reasonable plan, and I think we've certainly received that feedback from others. And I'll leave it for Brent to indicate what he would add in terms of looking forward, what it would take to consider additional releasing of those measures.
Yeah, so I think in phase 1, we really challenged ourselves to find some way to let these gyms operate. And that's why we came up with the outdoor setting with the 10 max. In phase 2, now back to 50% capacity, even indoor. And likely in phase 2, there isn't going to be a strict number on the outdoor settings. It's going to still require that there is a physical distancing and the disinfection of materials. But for the pure outside, without exceeding the inside capacity, say for using washrooms or lockers, there isn't going to be a specific number other than the actual group size application.
Okay, thank you.
The next question I'm hoping I can ask Minister Friesen, and Dr. Roussin touched on it as well, is just moving forward, and part of the, how we're successful with this is the importance of increased testing and increased tracing and tracking of the virus as well. So one of the things that I've talked about with my provincial counterparts as well is just the sharing of information across provincial boundaries and the need, and I'm curious whether or not there's been movement on whether it's almost like a national database of tracking and tracing as well as cases. Is that something that will make a difference continuing to move forward, so that it's not, this isn't obviously just a Manitoba thing, that all provinces start to see a clearer direction and the sharing of information and resources to be able to do whatever we can to help flatten that curve as we've talked about?
Thanks, Chuck, for the question. Yeah, that work is underway, both through the tables at which Brent Roussin sits on the special advisory committee on COVID-19. And it's also happening jurisdiction by jurisdiction, both at the minister's level and the deputy minister's level. A lot of sharing of information, a lot of regular interaction. Even today, in a few hours, I'll be back on the line talking to all of my colleagues, ministers of health across the country and in provinces and territories, and with the federal minister of health and the federal chief. That allows us to be at that table and say, look, what does it look like for contact tracing? I mean, look, when it comes to Manitoba, we've taken contact tracing very seriously, that need to ramp up testing, that need to deliver results of testing back more promptly, and that ability to contact that individual, sequester them, and allow the rest of society to get on with business. That is fundamental to us. So I can tell you that even right now, when it comes to a lot of different tools that we might make available in Manitoba, those discussions about what tools we should use, even a discussion as recently as this weekend about health human resource and how we could use federal public health personnel to help us in our social distancing and social isolation strategies. That work is going on.
And would that be a key part in terms of having that information across provincial jurisdictions and boundaries that would help to speed up and provide greater confidence in terms of opening up those boundaries and opening up provincial boundaries for people to move?
Well, we study a variety of key metrics, as Dr. Roussin said earlier. And we're looking for things like our case positivity rates. We're looking at the amount of testing we're doing. Then we're looking at the amount of tests that are positive return from that testing. And then we look outside of our boundaries and see what it looks like elsewhere. So, some people say that we're a little bit of an island in Manitoba right now with significantly lower numbers than outside. I mean, look at, you look at the Manitoba versus the national picture. Manitoba among the lowest 4 provinces for numbers with just 292 total cases, and in Quebec, almost 48,000 cases. So we will coordinate in order to have efficiency, and we're going to coordinate with other jurisdictions because we want to use ideas that are working. But in terms of the decision to reopen provincial boundaries, that will really be on the basis of the evidence. If we see that COVID-19 numbers are spiking, for instance, in Ontario, we're not going to be moving to open our borders. Our greatest threat right now is not the social transmission, that community transmission, it's the importation of the virus from outside of our borders.
Thank you, Minister Friesen. My question is to Deputy Premier and Minister of Families, Heather Stefanson, and then perhaps Dr. Roussin, you could weigh in from, of course, the health perspective. I do want to acknowledge and thank the Deputy Premier for reaching out to the Chamber Network for our early childhood education initiative. While we may not be experts in childcare, we are, as a Chamber Network, we've been doing it for well over 100 years, helping businesses start up, grow, and prosper. So that is the expertise that we are bringing to that initiative. So the question, it comes from a number of members. As businesses reopen and bring staff back to resume operations, a major challenge for many workers and families, of course, and their employer continues to be finding suitable childcare. What is your government's plan for childcare during the reopening phases?
Thanks, Loren, and thanks to both you and Chuck and the Chambers for really stepping up and helping us during this time and allowing us to bring forward this innovative program to get early childhood educators more a part of opening up new spaces in Manitoba. As a result of that, we've so far opened up 108 new childcare spaces in the province of Manitoba. That's more than the traditional average annual, which is about 50 spaces a year, and that's only in a few short weeks. So we think this program is working quite well. While some may say, there's not the uptake that they thought that there would be, I think it's been a tremendous success. I think that there are opportunities for us to build on this in the future, and maybe some ways that we'll work together to tweak that and look at your expertise and how we can work with the business community towards what is it that those workers need in terms of there might be more 24-hour spaces that are needed as a result of split shifts that are going to be done with people having maybe 2 jobs out there. There's other things that we're looking at, and what we want to do is create a system that has more choice for families. and for employees moving forward. We recognize, I think this whole COVID situation has made us realize the significant impact that childcare has on the economy, and that we need to start moving towards moving away from childcare necessarily being a social service, but more into it being a critical part of ensuring that people can get back to work and a critical part of our economy. So we are in the process of going through significant changes right now with respect to childcare. We had started that prior to COVID, and we had to get into the mode that we were in to ensure that we had the childcare there for those essential and critical service workers, including healthcare workers, first and foremost. But eventually, people are starting now to get back as the rules and restrictions are being lifted. More people are getting back to work, and we obviously want to ensure that we've got a system there that's there for those workers when they need it. So again, thank you to all of you for your tremendous efforts here, and we look forward to working with you moving forward on that front.
I know we only have Dr. Roussin for a couple more minutes. I do know that we are going to be having a discussion with Dr. Roussin and Cameron Friesen on Thursday as well, and that'll be taking place with the Chamber Network, so I appreciate you taking the time for that. I do want to talk a little bit, Dr. Roussin, and get maybe some advice that we have from one of the questions that's being asked. And a lot of businesses obviously are working remotely, working from home for the time being, but they're starting to make plans in terms of getting back into the offices. And so one of the questions that's been raised is, are there specific requirements that apply to office settings that a company needs to consider and implement as it plans on returning its workforce back to the office? And the question specifically is, if physical distancing cannot be achieved because of office design, would the use of PPEs be recommended to open the office?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So, certainly the public health orders that are in fact apply to the public and apply to the interaction of the public between businesses. They don't specifically apply to businesses. So certainly through, workplace safety and health, things like this, a business is required to ensure a safe environment for its employees. But certainly right back to those basics. So it's vital that employers are having their employees take a daily screening. So we have the online screening tool to ensure that no one is coming to work symptomatic. Hand hygiene available at all times. And then wherever it's possible to have that physical distancing except for brief exchanges is ideal. Now, certainly there's businesses that's just not possible. Sometimes it might just take a little creativity to do it. And so I'd still encourage businesses to look for ways to encourage that physical distancing, staggering lunch, all these things like this to avoid crowding. Things like non-medical masks are an option. They just need to be used properly. They need to be used with the understanding that they don't protect you, they protect the people around you. And when taking them off or putting them on can still, put you at risk if you're touching your face. So, I think that we're getting back to things. It's good. We're not getting back to normal. It's that new normal. So I'd still encourage employers who have done well with virtual workplaces, virtual meetings. There's no reason to necessarily go back unless that's absolutely vital for the business. So if you can still have some employees working at home to reduce crowding, I would encourage you to do so. We have a new normal now.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dr. Roussin. My question, I guess I'll start with perhaps Minister Eichler and then Minister Fielding. You may have heard there's a commercial rent issue for many businesses. And of course, we know the federal program was announced, Manitoba's participating, but right across the country, really, we have not seen significant uptake of that program, and many have been exploring as to why this is. So the question, and we've received numerous questions on this, what can the province of Manitoba do to encourage participation in this program? And some have actively across the country called for a temporary ban on commercial evictions. Is this something the province of Manitoba would consider or is considering That was a question from a number of people that we've received.
Let me start by saying that, everything's on the table. We've been working very closely with Minister Jolie and the other federal ministers in order to try and make the program work. And obviously, the landlords have to be a large player in this as well. But mainly, I think Mr. Fielding is the minister that's dealing with this more than I am. But certainly, we're ready to look at anything. Over to you, Scott.
I tried to give you both an
Trying
opportunity.
to move outside the screen of the thing. Well, we do, you're right, heard some concerns. The program really has been unveiled over the last probably 3 or 4 days. Then it was the details and getting online and that sort of stuff. I guess it was late last week. And so we have raised this. We have weekly, all the finance ministers have weekly calls with Minister Marno. And so we have repeatedly raised this. In fact, we spoke of it yesterday on our call. Now, some of the bigger players, I guess I would say, are looking to buy into it. I think maybe to Ralph's point, we can maybe use venues like yourself and saying this is an option that's there. But we have repeatedly raised it with the federal government. We're a minor partner in it. It's CMHC. So if you've got a mortgage or what have you through CMHC, you can go through that. If you don't, then CMHC can make those arrangements for you. But I guess it's the federal government, Minister Marno, I think, quote unquote, said there wasn't another pipeline to get the money to commercial renters, I guess, if you will. And so I don't anticipate there'll be any changes at the federal level on that program. To your point, you had said, is there any movement to any evictions on commercial landlords? I'm going to have to say that's not something that I'm considering right now, but I mean, we would obviously have discussions at the whole cabinet table, but I don't think that's really an option right now, at least that I'm considering, and I don't think many other jurisdictions are across the country as well. So, I think getting the message out about this, that the program would have both of the federal and provincial government pick up 50% of the cost. The landlord would pick up 25% of the cost, and also the tenant would pick up 25% of the cost. It is hard for landlords as well because they got mortgages and to pay as well. It is hard for them to turn around and get people to come back in their facilities as well. So I think we need to give the program a little bit more time before any major changes can happen to it. So maybe give it another week or two and let's see where things go with it. But I don't think there's a willingness right now from the federal government level to change the parameters of the program. They just don't think it'll be able to fly that way.
Okay, thank you.
My question would be for Minister Eichler. Of course, this being National Tourism Week this week, which is an important sector in Manitoba. And I know Minister Eichler was on a call. We did a national roundtable discussion earlier today. Obviously, this is an industry that has been significantly impacted along with retail, restaurants, tourism, the arts, been hit by the pandemic and I think it's pretty clear, are likely not to return to any normal business levels for some time. I'm just curious if the government is giving any consideration to sector-specific support programs that would maintain arts and tourism industries and keep main streets alive throughout the province.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. Yeah, good call this morning. Thanks for hosting that for us, Chuck. I just want to say thanks to Colin Ferguson and his team from Travel Manitoba. They've done just an outstanding job at trying to be good messengers and help those. And in fact, the tourism business has been hit really, really hard. And we have a path and a plan that we're going to roll out here in the next coming couple of weeks. And it's going to be about traveling in Manitoba and restarting our economy. There's lots to see in the province of Manitoba in order to take advantage of as well. So stay tuned, I would say, that there's more to come on that tourism package. It's going to include advertising to restart our economy, also to restart our tourism business. And we also worked with the Department of Agriculture, with the fisheries that come out of there as well, in order to help us promote locally our fishing and other outfitting lodges that we have within the province of Manitoba.
Thank you. Maybe staying with the tourism theme and economic development, one of the areas, I mean, we all know every sector in our community has been impacted, and we all have to pull together to be able to assist each of those sectors. But one sector that really, as Manitobans, I think we take a lot of pride in is our arts and cultural community, that we really do punch above our weight, and is one of the key drivers of tourism to this province. You know, everything from the Winnipeg Folk Festival to Folkorama and so many of the great things that make this such a wonderful place to visit. So my question is, we know performing arts groups and venues have taken a large financial hit over the past few months, and we've had several questions about audience sizes going forward. In BC, performing arts groups have been told there will be no gatherings of more than 50 people indoors until herd immunity or a vaccine. What are some of the key indicators Manitoba needs? Perhaps maybe this is to Dr. Roussin and Minister Friesen at first, if still there. To what key indicators does Manitoba have to see for gathering restrictions to be lifted or modified? Specifically, what do we need to see health-wise, case-wise, and vaccine-wise for group numbers to reach 100, 500 or more inside a venue? Again, given that this is such a key component to the arts and cultural community.
Yeah, so, it's, when we look at this virus, what we've learned from it is it spreads best with indoor, close, prolonged contact. And so these type of events is where we've seen these super spreader events, where a single individual has spread to 20, 30, 40 people in these events. So they're really challenging. Although we've learned to now how we can maybe host some of these events with some precautions, but these are going to be some of the last things that are going to occur when we get as we deal with this virus. So herd immunity without a vaccine is very difficult, right? So herd immunity for COVID-19, which has R naught of about 2.5, means that 60% of the population has to be infected before you begin to see benefits of herd immunity. And so when we know that 2 to 3% of people who acquire it die, that's a whole bunch of badness going on if we're shooting for herd immunity. Certainly you can achieve herd immunity better with a virus. So, so it's really going to be where this goes. We don't know that we're going to see a second wave. We don't know when that second wave is. We don't know what that second wave will look like. So it's going to be time before we know when we can have these large events again. But we just know that in multiple jurisdictions, this is where we've seen those super spreader events happen.
And Loren, I would just add the following if I could, and that is, right now we know that Manitoba is bucking the national trend. Our numbers for case positivity are very low. The Premier made clear before that as we increasingly open the economy, as we allow for gatherings of 25 indoor and 50 outdoor, people should not be shocked if they see the numbers in Manitoba going up. They should understand that our numbers right now are very low. We have created capacity in our healthcare system. We're opening safely. We're monitoring our numbers. What our goal is to be able to return more to normal while not overwhelming the healthcare system. So it's those numbers we're going to continue to watch. As our numbers stay low, then the discussions with Dr. Roussin and other jurisdictions will become, what would this look like for gatherings of 100? What would it look like for gatherings of 500? And I can tell you that even right now, one of those sector by sector groups that is continuing to meet is one with religious leadership across this province, where we're looking at, we're canvassing for ideas from religious leadership to say, what would this look like to allow you to reopen your facilities and have worship services? And even there, the same questions come up. So we'll be guided by the evidence. We'll be guided by the number, but make no mistake, I've been so impressed, and we all have, with the willingness of Manitobans to comply with all of this. And this has really been Manitoba's success story, the fact that people are trying to comply, they're trying to do the right thing to protect themselves, their families, and their neighbors and friends.
If I can just jump in there really quickly too, Loren, just with an example of, I think, how we all work together in terms of us and Dr. Roussin. And, one example of that is Margaret Redmond called me up from the the Assiniboine Park Conservancy, talking about, as we're lifting those restrictions and going to 50 people outside, what does that mean for the Assiniboine Park Zoo, for example? And we were able to work together. I said, put together a plan, we'll have Dr. Roussin sit down with you and work through that. And he did that, and it was wonderful, and it has culminated in them being able to open up now, which is fantastic. And I think, you know, we will challenge others to come up with, as long as we're living within the parameters as set out by the Chief Provincial Public Health Officer, you know, come up with those ideas about, you know, your organizations better than we do. But come up with those ideas, and we'll work with Dr. Roussin and his team to ensure that we find a safe way of opening up.
So if I may, sorry, Chuck, I'm not going to ask a question. I just want to confirm, because one of the things we do get approached, and I'm sure it's the same for you, Chuck, is some of the larger entities that do have significant public gatherings as a component of their business plan do have some ideas. So what I'm hearing from you is there's an eagerness and a receptiveness from the provincial government and provincial health officials. If someone comes to you with some ideas, you would definitely review those and try to find a way that still respects, of course, the public health parameters, but if people can come up with innovative solutions, that's something this government would be receptive to.
I'd say we are always open to looking at ideas. I would just want to make very clear now, there isn't the ability for the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra to have a Beethoven weekend and have 3,000 in the house at once. You just can't right now. So I wouldn't want to have anyone misinterpret this and think that this is an open door to having bomber games within the month of July. We're going to have to watch these numbers carefully. We will react with an abundance of caution. We will talk with our neighbors in other jurisdictions. We're going to do this right. What we have to avoid, as the previous said, is this COVID comeback.
Thank you.
I just want to build upon one of the answers that Minister Eichler talked about. And I think the comment was just in regards to, the question is not going to be to you. I'm going to throw it to Minister Fielding though, because I need to figure out who's got the money here. But the question just in regards to more and more people having to travel the province over the course of this summer. And I think one of the things that they're going to find is cell phone service is not great in this province. And I think more and more people are finding, as we're having to work from home and the need for digital infrastructure, the challenges that is, you know, sometimes occurs. I'm actually amazed we haven't thrown anybody off this Zoom call yet. Usually somebody freezes in the middle of it. And I'm curious in terms of some of the measures that the government is taking to improve technology and specifically the importance of digital infrastructure moving forward. And I'm suggesting this question is probably for the Minister of Finance.
It is, yeah.
Well, absolutely. I think Minister Wharton just recently introduced a measure, I guess it's the deep fiber, right?
That's right.
Using the broadband network that Manitoba Hydro has. So we think that's obviously an option that's available, right? That could help to expand it. We know we got to do a better job. I guess some cell phone service. There were some reports of Camperville with a recent fire that was there. So we want to work with the business community to kind of develop these things. We recently had a meeting with the Business Council. We're also part of, a lot of the members are the same members that are part of the Economic Advisory Committee to the Premier on COVID that identified that as a number one priority. And as you mentioned, life has changed a little bit with technologies and stuff like that. So I think we really need to step up more as a government to do items like this to make sure we are digitized and we're able to have communications that's going to be effective not just in Winnipeg but really across the province. So did you want to add
would you see this as something that would be a major investment in terms of restarting the economy and sort of developing us into this leader when it comes to technology? Is this something that your government sees as a real opportunity?
Well, I think we need to. I think as a society we're going to need to. As Dr. Ruse has talked about, there's a new norm that's in place. Probably the most overused term that everyone's using these days, but it's true, right? I mean, even whether you run your own business, I know just even in our personal business, it's changed dramatically just in the last 2-3 months. So I think it's something that the governments need to invest in, and whether that's a federal, provincial, municipal government approach to it with the business community, I really think that there's no option to do it. I think absolutely needs to be a big investment because the way we're doing commerce is just going to change. I mean, look at the retail sector; it's dramatically changed right off the bat, and the people that already were on the digital divide, whether it be online and all these types of things, are having an advantage, obviously through a crisis like this. And I think we're all going to have to catch up. So I would say absolutely, it's a pillar, something we need to focus on as we go forward.
Thank you. Staying with Minister Fielding, because it deals with some labor. issues. One of the things, of course, and we want to thank the province, Minister Fielding, but in particular our friends within organized labor, as we dealt with, of course, the first, as we saw layoffs, there was the 8-week period where we moved into severance, not something anyone wanted to move into, excuse me. But one of the questions we have is, once now with reopening, there are still many, particularly within the restaurants, that are not going to be able to bring back the full complement of staff. And so you may be in a period, once the clock starts ticking, when does that clock start ticking on the temporary layoffs moving into severance? And to what extent is the province willing to continue to work with business and labor to say, let's make continuing changes to that to ensure that businesses can bring back, in particular around restaurants, bring back people in a staggered approach without having to trigger something that is in no one's interest.
Yeah, and so a part of that, you're right, there is an employment standards change. So right now, if you lay off someone, let's say for an 8 out of a 16-week period, above and beyond that, you have to either sever the employee or you have to pay them out, which isn't good for both the employee and employer. And so what we did during the COVID crisis, while the state of emergency is in play, we essentially put the time, the clock ticking on that 16-week period on pause. So, and then the clock will start ticking again once the emergency, state emergency is lifted. So I think your question is, would we consider further measures in terms of that? So I think we would. I mean, we'll continue to have discussions with business and labor as it relates to that, but providing more flexibility to business and labor we think is important. The CERB program, it's been a good program, but there certainly is a lot of indications where people are liking being on the CERB, and let's face that, we know that the unemployment is going to rise really across the country. So that might be a bit of short-term thinking, just to say, well, I'm going to stay on the CERB as opposed to get back into the work world. So the answer to the question is yes, we would consider that, and we want to continue to work with labor and business.
Thank you.
I know we only have Dr. Roussin for a couple more minutes. I think one of the questions, and a lot of parents out there are getting used to homeschooling their children, which is a real joy, I'm sure, for many of us out there. And I'm curious in terms of what it looks like, and I think many parents are going to be wondering, what does it look like for school-age children potentially come the fall when kids go back to school? And I wonder if you can shed some light on what that might look like.
Yeah, so I mean, we're still looking at those details. We're going to still have to see what our numbers look at that time. What I can say is it's not going to look like it did before. So that it's going to be, there's going to be some changes. We're going to need to ensure there's that physical distancing, which means there may be a combination of some virtual learning, some staggered classes, certainly no assemblies. And then certainly what we always talk about there is that there's going to be zero tolerance for sick kids coming to school, sick kids or staff. And so the details will still be worked out. Public health will be advising the department on what that could look like. It may look different in different areas, but it's sure not going to look the same as it did before. We're going to have to find a way to reduce crowding within classrooms.
Thank you. One of the questions, and as we know, we go through, as we're walking the road to recovery, that we need to take a look at some of the examples from the past, some of the measures done previously around stimulus to re-engage our economy. But also this does represent a wonderful opportunity to rethink, rather than just rebuild what we had, but reimagine what could be. And my question comes from the social enterprise community, and that's the role of social procurement in the government measures going forward, in particular addressing the needs of many of our vulnerable communities. And so I guess my question is to everyone generally, where do you see the role of social procurement as part of the infrastructure of our recovery plan?
Yeah, maybe I'll start and others can jump in. And I think, as you know, we're always looking at innovative ways to find new ways of doing things and getting better results for Manitobans, particularly those most vulnerable. in our society. And certainly it's part of my mandate to set up the Social Innovation Office, which we have done. We've introduced two of our first social impact bonds in both the Department of Health as well as the Department of Families. So we're pleased with how that's moving forward. We do believe that there are huge opportunities in the area of procurement as well to move forward, and that can be a part of that. Certainly, if people have ideas, we don't pretend to and profess to have all of the ideas and a monopoly on good and innovative ideas. And if many of your members want to see something and have a further discussion on this, be happy to do that down the road. So we definitely want your input on this. I don't know, Scott, if you have anything you want to add, or anyone else?
Yeah, I'll just mention what the government did in the election campaign. What the government commitment was to really look at procurement, something that's not going to have a real impact on frontline services. And we estimated using some consultants. There's that not a bad word again, consultants, but the consultants gave us good information, and we think that we can save up to $200 million of taxpayer dollars just by procuring things better. It sounds pretty logical, but there's a whole bunch of different departments. They may be ordering gravel or sand or whatever the deal would be, but they weren't doing it together. So you weren't getting good values for money. So we are able to save a lot of money in procurement, and we are able to look at social procurement. And the social enterprise is something that Manitoba Housing is really, I think led on, quite frankly, really across the country, where they've used a number of the social enterprises to make minor changes, maintenance and stuff like this. What it does, it allows people that maybe don't have the skills, or maybe they came from a background or criminal justice background, they were in jail or what have you, giving them the skills to get things done. So I think that's an important part of it. It's not the only part of moving forward, but I think it certainly has its place. And so if it makes sense for taxpayers, I think we'd be all ears to take a look at different avenues, whether it be social procurement or other items such as that.
Thank you.
I'll continue on with you, Minister Fielding. Again, I think one of the things that you've announced earlier is some increased funding in regards to infrastructure in Manitoba, which I think is greatly appreciated by a number of organizations. I wonder if you're also looking at other incentive programs, whether it's tax credits and things in the past, and someone's been asking about sort of a home renovation tax credit again. Are you looking at different things like that can help stimulate the economy during these challenging times? And if so, is there a way that people can share ideas with you in terms of some of those things? So just looking for a little bit of thoughts from you on that.
Yeah, the Premier announced, I think it was last week, an additional $500 million for infrastructure funding over the next 2 years. So everyone knows infrastructure, when times are tough, it acts as a stimulant in so many different ways. The areas specifically that we kind of announced and said we're looking at would be wastewater. We think there's ability to kind of move some good infrastructure dollars quickly there. Partnerships with the municipalities who can get the dollars out the door, highways funding. And the home renovation tax credit was a very effective program that the federal government did in 2008 during the Great Recession. And so it's definitely an idea that I'm looking at, but we want to make sure we look at getting the dollars out the doors quickly for it. So yes, we are looking at all different avenues, but for sure you'll see those wastewater partnerships with municipalities, highway spending, and if there's an ability to stimulate the economy. Another thing which we committed in our election campaign now, which is government commitment, is an area where it's environmental, right? Environmental, I think it was a $25 million commitment to environmental types of initiatives. That was a commitment, a long-term commitment of the government. So maybe there's a way to blend these types of things in. We haven't made the final decisions on that. That will be coming in the next, I would say, number of weeks. The Premier will announce.
Got a quick question from the Q&A section, and that is, there are a number of businesses that don't fit neatly into the categories that have been outlined, be it for the public health order or the reopening phases. One in particular, escape rooms, there's being categorized in say, for example, like movie theaters and casinos, when maybe they're more like restaurants. Just using that as one example. There are others that have been brought to our attention. Is there an appeal mechanism for business to say, I don't believe my business fits into that particular categorization, and here's what I think is more appropriate. Just curious as to whether business can reach out to the government and have those discussions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as mentioned, we're always happy to hear from the business community to raise their concerns, raise their, some of their plans that we can review and take a look. And, and I think that there's lots of ways of looking at things that we're going to always err on the side of trying to limit the spread of this virus and these things, but we're always happy to see these comments.
Chuck, I don't know if you want to ask one question, then I can ask one, and then we can move to closing. You're on mute.
And there it is, right?
There it is.
I guess the question is, as businesses reopen, some of the challenges that I know that they're faced with. One is having additional cost, having to purchase PPE and taking additional measures, having reduced capacity within their whether it's a restaurant or 50% capacity, additional challenges. Is the government thinking of other sort of supports over the longer term to help these businesses with some of these additional costs, with reduced revenues coming in as well? So I'm just curious if, where the government's mindset is in terms of sort of long-term support. Businesses, I think in the short term are able to get through. We know the wage subsidy program has been extended. Is the province looking at some of the longer term issues as well on this?
I'll maybe quickly address it if anyone wants to chime in as well. And so the Premier developed the Premier's advisory committee, kind of looking at the longer term. And the Business Council actually has formed kind of a group amongst that as well in terms of longer term perspectives. So for instance, there may be a lot of federal programs that come into fruition, but they may miss kind of the Manitoba perspective because maybe the industry isn't as big on the national basis. So I think they've, and that's the role of that committee, to really establish some longer term plans of where we should be making investments in the province. So whether you're talking more for the local businesses in terms of PPE and that sorts of things, that's items we can take back. We've made no decisions on that unless, Cam, if you've got anything more towards that, but it's items that we can bring back. We haven't made a decision, but we do have a group that is looking at the long term of where Manitoba should go. We're still kind of, I call maybe the crisis mode and dealing with that, and we're kind of moving into that intermediate stage and the long term, something that we think that Manitoba can really benefit from if we're able to do it right and imagine where the province can go over the next 2, 3, 4, 20 years.
Yeah, I just want to add, there's several programs under my department that we can help business, mainly on the retraining side of things that I would encourage all businesses to look at. We can talk about that offline if somebody needs some help with that. Also with the summer student program, we've allowed up to 5 students, up to $7 an hour the government will pay to help students get back to work. So that's up to $25,000. So I encourage all businesses to have a look at that. It's going to go online Thursday, the new website. So certainly we wish to encourage everyone to do that. But also as we move forward, we know business needs help. So the B2B, the business to business with the protective equipment is really important. I would encourage you to look at that website as well. It's not always about the money. It's about making sure we have the right tools in the right place to make sure that business is successful and we don't have a repeat.
Thank you. Before maybe I turn it over to Jessica to conclude our meeting with some comments from our panelists and our chair, just a comment more than anything else than a question. But one of the things we have heard extensively from our membership is through this crisis and moving forward, what we've seen in terms of government at all levels, the speed to which government is responding, the ability to actually get some things done that previously the answer was no. It's something that I've seen emerged in the business community is I don't think there's going back to what it was pre-COVID in terms of what businesses' expectation, what I think the public's expectation of all 3 levels of government is we've seen far too much success in government being able to pivot, to be able to move quick, to overcome barriers that previously we allowed the no to be where the conversation stopped. So we really look forward to continuing to have these conversations with you going forward. In particular, how we can seize the opportunity that was the yes and the let's get it done spirit that is seeing us through this crisis, seeing us achieve the flattening of the curve. I think that spirit must continue because the expectation in the community is we will not accept the status quo that was in the past. So more of a comment, but if anyone wants to respond to that before we turn it over to Jessica. Deputy Premier?
Yeah, we look forward to working with you in terms of moving Manitoba forward. So, and I think you've touched on a lot of the things that we would concur. I mean, there are ways and innovative ways that we can work together towards achieving better results for Manitobans. So we look forward to the continued dialogue and working together towards those goals.
If I could also jump in, I would just add this, Loren. You're absolutely right. There are learnings to take away from COVID-19 about how government functions, how departments collaborate, how our systems work to support decision-making and results-based activities. I can tell you that 2.5 years ago, when we as a government articulated the idea of a shared health enterprise, there were a lot of questions saying, well, how would this possibly help? We have seen every day, we've lived the life of seeing how a more coordinated healthcare system has helped us to respond with Manitobans being the recipients. So are there things to learn from COVID-19 that we can use to create a new way of doing government? We absolutely believe it's true.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you to Loren and Chuck for moderating that Q&A from our audience. And thank you to Dr. Roussin for spending this time with us and answering some of those questions. We have a few minutes left and I wanted to offer approximately 2 minutes to each minister. I'm going to invite you by name and we'd really appreciate you to share some closing remarks. So I'd first like to invite Heather Stefanson, Deputy Premier, Minister of Families, to please share a few remarks with us.
That's great. Thanks, Jessica. And thanks to you and to Loren and Chuck and to all your members for everything that you're doing towards the goals that we're trying to achieve here together. And it's important that we continue this dialogue. I think this is a great forum to do this in. We've done it with other organizations. I think it's worked well. Minister Eichler and Minister Fielding and I have done some, and I know Minister Friesen has done some as well as Dr. Roussin, and I think it's a great way that we can communicate. You can get your ideas to us, and we can listen and try and figure out ways, innovative ways to work together towards achieving better results. I did touch on childcare already as a response to one of the questions. So we look forward to continuing our work with the Winnipeg Chamber and the Manitoba Chambers as well, moving forward to ensure that we have more adequate childcare for those that need it moving forward. I did want to just touch on homelessness. You will know that we announced $1.2 million to expand the capacity of homeless shelters, adding over 100 shelter beds. And that's not just in Winnipeg, but also in Brandon and other communities as well. And so I think we are moving in that direction in terms of persons with disabilities as well. The Premier made an announcement this morning, a $4.6 million announcement for a disability economic support program, which is $200 going out to 23,000 Manitobans with disabilities. It is income tested as well. And so I know that he made that announcement this morning. So those are some of the other things that we're working on as well. And certainly any other questions that you have for the Department of Families or for us as a government. I know we couldn't get to all the questions today, but we're happy to endeavor to get you all the answers to those questions. And I very much, and I know we all very much as a government look forward to this continued dialogue.
Thank you, Deputy Premier. Really appreciate that. I'd like to invite Scott Fielding, Minister of Finance, to please share some comments.
Sure. Well, thanks very much. And, I don't want to undersell all the work that you and your members have done. I know with Loren and Chuck, at one point it seemed, 2 weeks into this crisis, my wife asked me, who is this Loren Remillard and Chuck Davidson? Because they seem to be talking to you every day. And so I want to really thank you guys and for all your support for everything that's going, because, we are getting information and, we do listen, right? And we have made some important investments. The Privy Council has recently said the Manitoba's got some of the most important supports for businesses and individuals. And so we're happy about that. As a Manitoba economy, I think we can do really well. Generally, Manitoba, because of our diversified economy, tends to be kind of a leader, I guess, if you will, in down times. We don't have the boom buses, Calgary's or Edmonton's or Alberta's and others of the world. With the projections that we're seeing, really depends on which bank you have, whether it be, minus 3% or minus 8% GDP growth. But I think Manitoba, because of the fact that we are one of the last to go into what I'll say is a total shutdown, and one of the first to pull out, quite frankly. And I think people don't realize too, with Manitoba's versus other jurisdictions, there was a lot of businesses that were still, active and involved. And I truly think by listening to your members and the business community, we can get some programs that'll be right, that can really give businesses a little bit of a breath. And hate to use all these acronyms and all these things that bridge the future and all these sorts, but it really does make a difference. If we can get these programs right, the training in place, I think it can really set Manitoba apart for the future. So thank you for all the work that you guys are doing, and we want to continue to have dialogue with you all.
Thank you, Minister. I would like to invite Minister of Economic Development and Training, Ralph Eichler. Please share some comments.
Thank you for the opportunity to work with the Manitoba Chamber, the Winnipeg Chamber, and your members. Of course, it's really important as we start our recovery back into phase 2 that we take it very seriously. And we don't want to forget that this COVID is really alive and well. We are crushing it. We're certainly getting there, but we don't want to have the fear out there either. But we want to be smart enough to have the confidence for not only our businesses, but for our customers in order to ensure that we move forward in a safe and cautious way. But certainly we don't want to forget about post-secondary either. Post-secondary is going to be a large part of our recovery as we go forward. People are going to rethink what they've been doing. And I think that I had a meeting with the presidents yesterday, and there's optimism there as well. So certainly as we start down this path to recovery, we know that we're going to be able to get through this together. So stuff like this makes it that much easier to be able to make sure we get the information we need out to your memberships and to Manitobans in order for us to stay active and stay ahead. So thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I'd now like to welcome Cameron Friesen, Minister of Health, Seniors and Active Living, to please share some remarks.
Thanks, Jessica. Thanks to my colleagues this afternoon for being part of this call, and thank you to your members who are out there and leading and making this work. It is a whole new world out there for conducting a business, and people are adapting, and it's just impressive to go into a business or to see an industry and to see the extent to which people are making their customers and their employees and their staff members all safe, and to be able to keep that economy working. So here's the deal for Manitoba. I would say from my perspective as the health minister, Manitoba reacted, and we reacted significantly based on what we saw in other places. And so now we are here in this date in late May with no new cases today, no one in hospital, no one in ICU, no one on a ventilator. But this story is not yet fully written. So I say that the efforts that we made in order to buy time. What did that time buy us? It bought us capacity. We were able to retool our healthcare system. We have capacity there now. We were able to procure the PPE that we needed to keep patients and healthcare workers safe. We were able to put new virtual tariffs and fees in place to help doctors treat patients on a remote and distance basis. We got to work at establishing and looking for a vaccine, and we were able to essentially get things where they needed to be in personal care homes and hospitals. We are where we are today because of a great team of leaders across Manitoba who are working hard. We're going to continue to work hard. And I'll come back to what I said before, and that is it's a balanced approach. It's that need to get it right in terms of saying the data is leading us to reopen. We are confident in the numbers. At the same time, we are committed to keeping Manitobans safe. So no easy answers, but we'll keep going. Last thing I'd say is a shout out to all those Manitoba businesses and industries who've been helping us out on personal protective equipment. I mean, there's companies here like Mondetta, Icon Technologies doing visors, Diesel custom sewing, Precision ADM making silicone masks. So many companies stepping up, retooling to provide what we need to help fight on COVID-19. Way to go, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Minister. And thank you to each of you for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. Thank you for your leadership throughout this time and for having this conversation with us. I want to say thank you to everyone who's joined us online. We've had a huge amount of people join us today, so we really appreciate that. Thank you to each of our panelists for joining and spending this time with us. Please remember to join us in our next webinar on Thursday in partnership with the Manitoba Chamber of Commerce, where we will hear from Minister Friesen and Dr. Brent Roussin on healthy workplace protocols and hygiene practices. And also we have a partnership with the Manitoba Chamber in the survey that we are still looking for your feedback in. You can find more information on our Twitter and Facebook page and also winnipeg-chamber.com. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.